Every bride left him within a week, and the whole frontier laughed at him. But the one bride nobody wanted, the one they called broken, she was the only one who ever stayed. Welcome to my channel, real stories that hit different. Let's begin. 3 brides, 3 weeks, 3 times the whole town watched him ride back alone through that dusty frontier road with nothing but an empty saddle and a broken name. They called him cursed. They called him impossible. Some said no woman with sense would ever stay under his roof. And they were right. About every woman except one. She arrived on the last wagon of the season, no family sending her off, no dowry, no one waving goodbye. The town took one look at her and turned away. But she walked up to his door, knocked twice, and changed everything he thought. He knew about what a person is worth. Stay. Because what happens between these two broken souls will hit you somewhere you forgot existed. His name was Caleb Horn, 36 years old. A man who owned the finest ranch on the eastern edge of Dust Creek, with 100 head of cattle, clean water wells, and more land than most men saw in a lifetime. By every frontier measure, he was a catch. Strong hands, honest work, a house with a real wooden floor instead of packed dirt. But 3 brides had come through that door, and 3 brides had left before the week was out. Nobody fully understood why, and Caleb never explained. He just rode back alone each time, unsaddled his horse in silence, and went back to work like a man who had accepted that some things were simply not meant for him. The first bride had come from a neighboring town 2 years prior, a pretty, well-dressed woman named Clara who took one look at the isolation of the ranch, the endless flat land stretching in every direction, and the way Caleb went quiet for long stretches without explanation, and decided by day 4 that she would rather face the shame of leaving than a lifetime of that silence. The second arrived 6 months later, a widow named Ruth, who was practical and strong but left on day 6, saying only that something in that house felt heavy in a way she couldn't name. The third lasted exactly 5 days before riding off on the supply wagon without a single goodbye. After that, the town stopped suggesting names, and Caleb stopped asking. What nobody in Dust Creek knew, what Caleb had never told a single soul, was why the house felt heavy. 3 years before the first bride ever arrived, Caleb had lost his younger brother on that ranch. A riding accident on a stormy afternoon. That happened so fast there was no time to stop it and no way to undo it after. Caleb had been 50 yards away and hadn't reached him in time. He had buried his brother himself under the old oak at the edge of the property and never spoken about it again. The grief hadn't left. It had just gone quiet inside him, the way a fire goes quiet when it runs out of wood but the heat stays in the walls for hours after. The town had mostly given up on him by the time the last wagon of autumn rolled into Dust Creek carrying mail, supplies, and 3 new arrivals looking to start over on the frontier. 2 of them were claimed before the wagon had fully stopped. A young couple reuniting with family, quickly absorbed into the warmth of waiting arms. The third stepped down last, slowly, with a small worn bag and no one waiting. Her name was May. She was 28, plain by the frontier's loud standards, with steady eyes and hands that showed she had worked hard for every year of her life. She stood in the middle of the road looking at the town with an expression that was neither hopeful nor defeated, just ready. She had heard about Caleb before arriving. Word traveled on wagons the same way rumors traveled everywhere, fast and slightly wrong. She knew 3 brides had left. She knew the town called him cursed. She knew no one would likely offer her a welcome or a warm introduction. What people didn't know about May was that she had spent the last 4 years caring for a dying father alone on a failing farm in a town that had stopped caring long before she left it. She knew grief the way you know an old neighbor, not fondly, but familiarly. She knew silence. She knew heavy houses. And she was not afraid of any of it. She walked to the post office and asked the keeper for directions to Caleb Horn's ranch. The old keeper looked at her over his spectacles for a long moment before giving them the look of a man deciding whether to warn her or simply let things unfold. He gave her the directions and said nothing else. She thanked him and walked the 2 miles to the ranch without stopping. When she arrived, Caleb was mending a fence post near the gate, his back to the road. He heard her boots on the dry ground and turned. They looked at each other for a moment, two people who had both been worn down by things they hadn't chosen. Then May set her bag on the ground and said simply, "I heard you need someone steady." "I'm steady." Caleb didn't say yes immediately. He wasn't sure what to say at all. He had spent so long preparing for people to leave that he had forgotten how to prepare for someone to arrive with any seriousness behind it. He told her plainly that 3 women had already left, that the ranch was isolated, that he wasn't a man who talked much, and that whatever people in town had said about him was probably close enough to true. May listened to all of it without flinching. Then she picked up her bag and said, "Are you going to show me inside, or are we having this conversation in the wind all evening?" Caleb blinked. Then, for the first time in longer than he could remember, something almost like a smile crossed his face. He opened the gate. The first day passed quietly. May did not try to fill the silence with conversation. She assessed the house practically, what needed cleaning, what needed mending, what had been neglected in the way things get neglected when a person is too deep in grief to notice the small details of living. She cooked a simple meal that evening without making it an event, set 2 plates on the table, and sat down without ceremony. Caleb sat across from her, unsure what to make of a woman who moved through his heavy house like she had been navigating heavy houses her whole life. They ate mostly in silence, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of 2 people who had both learned that words aren't always the point. By the 3rd day, the town was already watching. People found reasons to ride past the road near the ranch, checking on livestock that didn't need checking, running errands that could have waited. They expected to see signs of trouble, early arguments, a packed bag near the door. What they saw instead was smoke from the chimney in the morning, a cleaned yard, a mended curtain in the window. Small signs of a house becoming something other than just a building. Mrs. Hargrove, at the dry goods store, told her husband that night that she gave it 1 more day at most. Her husband said nothing. He had learned to say nothing when his wife was probably wrong about something she felt certain about. On the 4th night, it happened. Caleb woke in the early hours from the nightmare that had visited him regularly for 3 years. The same slope, the same storm, the same moment he didn't reach in time. He sat up in the dark, breathing hard, the silence of the ranch pressing in from every side. And then he noticed a faint light under the door. He got up and found May sitting at the kitchen table with a small candle, a cup of tea, and her father's old Bible open in front of her. She looked up without surprise, like she had half expected him. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just got up, poured a second cup, and set it across the table from her. Caleb sat down, and for the first time in 3 years, he started to talk. He told her about his brother. All of it. The storm, the slope, the 50 yards, the oak tree at the edge of the property. He told her in the halting, careful way of someone removing something heavy that has been carried so long, the body has forgotten what it feels like to put it down. May listened the way she always listened, fully, quietly, without rushing to fill the spaces. When he finished, the candle had burned low and the night outside had gone from black to the deep blue that comes just before dawn. May wrapped her hands around her cup and said, Grief that size doesn't mean something went wrong with you. It means something went right. You loved him that much. Caleb looked at the table for a long time. Then he nodded once slowly. Word spread through Dust Creek the way. Word always spread, without anyone meaning to spread it, and faster than anyone expected. The post office keeper mentioned to the feed store owner that the fourth bride had made it past day 5. The feed store owner mentioned it to the blacksmith. The blacksmith told his wife, who told Mrs. Hargrove, who went unusually quiet on the subject for the first time in years. By the end of the week, the whole town knew that smoke was still rising from Caleb Horn's chimney every single morning. And something shifted in the way people talked about him, not dramatically, not all at once, but the way light shifts in a room when a cloud moves off the sun, slowly, without announcement. Just different. 2 weeks passed and May had not packed her bag. She had, in fact, unpacked it fully for the first time, folding her few things into the bathtub that found some of the chest of drawers in the spare room with the quiet deliberateness of someone who intends to stay. Caleb noticed but said nothing. He started doing small things without being asked, leaving a lantern lit on the porch when he came in late from the fields, bringing an extra portion of water from the well, fixing the squeaking hinge on the kitchen door that he had lived with for 2 years without caring. Neither of them named what was happening. But the house, the heavy, grief-soaked, 3-bride defeated house was changing slowly, honestly, the way things change when no one is pretending. Morning came softer than it had in years on that ranch. Caleb stepped outside before sunrise as he always did, but something in the air felt different, lighter, like after a long rain when the ground finally accepts the water it needed. He stood at the fence, looking at the flat land stretching toward the horizon, and realized the weight that had lived behind his chest for 3 years had shifted. Not gone, but shifted, the way a stone moves when water finds the right path around it. Inside, he could hear May moving quietly, starting the fire, beginning the day without drama. And that small, ordinary sound felt like the most extraordinary thing he had heard in years. The twist came on the 14th day. Not from outside, not a villain, not a threat, not a rival riding in from the dust. It came in a letter, and it threatened to take everything. The twist came on the 14th day. Not from outside, not a villain, not a threat, not a rival. It came in a letter. Caleb brought it in from the post without looking at it closely and left it on the table while he went back to work. May saw the return address first, a law office from the county seat, 2 days, ride east. She didn't open it, but when Caleb came in at dusk, she pointed to it without a word. He opened it slowly, read it once, then set it flat on the table. The ranch, the land, the cattle, the wells, everything was being claimed by a creditor his father had borrowed from 20 years ago before passing the land to Caleb, a debt Caleb never knew existed. And the notice gave him 60 days to pay or vacate. He didn't sleep that night. He sat at the table with a letter and a lantern and did the numbers over and over until the numbers stopped changing. There was no way. The cattle were not enough. The savings were not enough. 60 days on the frontier was not enough time to build what he would need to fight a legal claim from a county seat, creditor with a lawyer and a signed paper. He had built this ranch with his own hands after his brother died, partly out of duty, partly because working until exhaustion was the only thing that quieted the grief. And now it was going to be taken by a debt he never chose and never knew. He put his head in his hands at that table and stayed that way for a long time. May found him there in the early morning hours, exactly as he had found her 2 weeks before. She read the letter herself. Without asking permission, she was past asking permission for things that concerned them both. She sat across from him and read it twice. Then she set it down and looked at him directly. "How much?" she asked. He told her the number. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I have something." Caleb looked up. She explained slowly. Her father's farm, the one she had left behind, had been sold after his death by the county to settle his own debts. But there had been a remainder, a small amount left over that she had, carried in a sealed envelope sewn into the lining of her worn bag since the day she left. She had been saving it without knowing what for. Now she knew. Caleb refused immediately, firmly, without hesitation, in the way that men refuse things when their pride is the only unbroken thing they have left. He told her it was not her debt, not her problem, not her land. May let him finish. Then she looked at him with those steady eyes and said, "It is now." 2 words. The same quiet certainty she had carried since the day she stepped off that wagon, with no one waiting. Caleb opened his mouth to argue again. But something in her face, the absolute stillness of it, the complete absence of doubt, stopped every word before it formed. He closed his mouth, looked at the letter, looked at her, and understood that arguing with May when she had decided something was like arguing with the prairie wind. Together they rode to the county seat. 2 days there, 2 days back, with the envelope and every document the ranch had ever produced. The creditor's lawyer was a smooth, well-dressed man who clearly expected a defeated rancher arriving alone to sign things over quietly. He did not expect a woman who had read every line of the original debt document the night before and arrived with calm, specific questions about the interest, calculations, and the legal standing of a 20-year-old verbal agreement. The lawyer adjusted his collar twice. By the end of the second day, a settlement had been reached for significantly less than the original demand. Caleb paid it. The ranch stayed his. On the ride home, the sky turned the deep orange and purple of a frontier sunset that looked almost too beautiful to be real. They rode side by side without speaking for a long stretch. Then Caleb said, without looking over, "You didn't have to do that." May kept her eyes on the trail ahead. "I know," she said simply. Another long silence. The horses moved steadily through the cooling evening air. Then Caleb said, quieter this time, "Why did you?" May was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Because you would have done it for me." He had no answer for that. Because she was right. And they both knew it. When they rode back into Dust Creek, the town noticed. People always noticed. Things on the frontier, there was little enough happening that arrivals and departures carried meaning. Mrs. Hargrove saw them ride in together and watched from the dry goods store doorway with an expression she couldn't quite organize. The post office keeper looked up from his counter and allowed himself a small satisfied nod. Even the men at the feed store, who had placed quiet bets among themselves about how long the fourth bride would last, went unusually silent as Caleb and May rode past without rushing, without performance, like two people who had been through something real together and come out the other side intact. The ranch changed after that. Not dramatically, not the way stories sometimes pretend things change, all at once and obviously. It changed the way good things change, slowly, in small details that you only notice when you look back. The yard stayed clean. The fence stayed mended. In the evenings there was light in the windows later than before, the warm glow of two people sitting at a table, sometimes talking, sometimes not, simply occupying the same space without heaviness. Caleb started sleeping through the night more often than not. The nightmare still came sometimes, but when it did, there was a candle already lit in the kitchen and a second cup waiting on the table. One Sunday morning, Caleb walked to the old oak at the edge of the property, the one under which he had buried his brother 3 years before. He stood there for a long time with his hat in his hands. May did not follow him. She watched from the porch and understood without being told that this was something a man needed to do alone. When he came back, his eyes were red, but his shoulders were different, lower, easier, like something had finally been set down for good at the base of that tree. He walked past her into the house without a word. She handed him a cup of coffee. He took it. That was enough. Spring came to the frontier with a particular generosity it sometimes shows after a hard winter, wildflowers across the plain, water in the creek, cattle fat and healthy on fresh grass. The ranch felt alive in a way it hadn't in years. A neighbor stopped by one afternoon and stood at the gate for a moment before calling out that he barely recognized the place. Caleb came out to meet him, and the neighbor looked from the clean yard to the mended barn to the smoke from the chimney and said, with genuine surprise, "Caleb Horn, you look like a man who's finally gotten right with something." Caleb thought about it for a moment. Then he said, "I had some help." He proposed on a Wednesday evening with no ring and no speech prepared. They were sitting at the table after supper when he simply put down his cup and sighed, "May, I'd like this to be permanent. If you're willing." He said it the way he said most things, plain, honest, without decoration. May looked at him for a long moment. The candle between them threw quiet light across the table. Outside, the wind moved through the prairie grass the way it always had, indifferent, endless, and somehow comforting. Then she said, "I was wondering when you'd get around to asking." Caleb looked down at the table. Something that was almost a laugh moved through his chest. "Was it too long?" She picked up her cup. "Just long enough," she said. The town of Dust Creek had seen many things in its years on the frontier: droughts, floods, fortunes won and lost on a single cattle drive, men who arrived with nothing and built something, men who arrived with everything and lost it all. But the wedding of Caleb Horn and May, held on a warm Saturday in early summer with the preacher, a handful of neighbors, and a yard full of wildflowers that May had gathered herself from the ridge that morning, was remembered long after other events had faded. Not because it was grand, because it wasn't, because it was two worn, honest people standing in the open air, making a plain promise to each other that everyone present could feel was absolutely true. And the frontier, which was not known for its sentimentality, went quiet for it. Caleb turned to May before the preacher finished and said simply, "Every empty thing in this house, you filled it." Without ever being asked, May looked at him with those same clear, unimpressed, completely honest eyes. And they were bright, just for a moment. Then she said, "You weren't cursed, Caleb. You were just waiting for someone who wasn't afraid of a heavy house." Frontier wind moved through the yard. The old oak at the edge of the property stood quiet in the summer light. And every person standing in that yard, rough hands, weathered faces, people who had seen hard things and said little about them, felt something loosen in their chests and had no word for what it was. Only that it was real. Only that it was good. And only that some stories, the ones that matter most, don't begin with fireworks and grand entrances. They begin with a worn bag, a steady voice, and someone brave enough to knock on a door that everyone else had already walked away from. Tell the frontier you were here. She stayed when everyone left. Subscribe to my channel for more stories that ride straight to the soul. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Comment below if this story hit you somewhere real.